This is Paisley. I was born here and it's where I live today. So you might be thinking, well, why does that matter to me? In return, I believe that understanding your hometown and other places demonstrates that you're willing to broaden your knowledge about other cultures. Everywhere you go is different and unique. Even the smallest towns and villages have something that makes them stand out anywhere in the world. So, where is Paisley, might you ask? Well, the town lies in the west of Scotland, being a part of the county Renfrewshire. It neighbours Glasgow, the city, which is a 7 mile drive or a 12-minute train. Paisley is the largest town in Scotland in terms of population, with 77,222 residents living inside the town during the 2020 period. Although it might not be as big or well known as the two megacities, Glasgow and Edinburgh, with them managing over 1 million residents living inside the cities during the same year, Paisley is still rich with Scottish history dating back hundreds of years, so let's have a closer look at Paisley itself. Okay, so first I'm going to be looking at Paisley as a whole and the story behind the town itself. Paisley's name was first recorded in the 16th century, where the town was formerly known as a number of names, like Paisley, 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 however they wanted to call it. It did have a lack of documentation during those times though. It was only during the 18th century that the name Paisley formed and it is associated with the town presently. Near the late 1800s, the town turned into a small market town into an important industrial town. Paisley managed to draw in English mill owners while immigrants from Ayrshire and the Highlands flocked to the town. This provided work for women and children. Mills were being built in the town and began producing shawls which were labelled Paisley. They were an imitation of cashmere because silk went out of fashion in the late 1870s. Paisley had become known worldwide for thread manufacture under the guidance of a man named Thomas Coates. Weaving had become the town's main industry by the mid-19th century. The most famous Paisley weavers' products were shawls, which had the Paisley pattern. It became fashionable after being worn by the young Queen Victoria. Despite being of Kashmiri design, Paisley's name was quickly associated with the teardrop-like pattern. Although shawls were no longer fashionable in the 1870s, the Paisley pattern is still a significant symbol of the town. The Renfrewshire Council even have the design of the Paisley pattern on their logo. The industrial decline in Paisley and Renfrewshire hit the weaving and the shipbuilding industry hard. It started during a period in 1841 to 1843, where 67 mill owners out of 112 went into bankruptcy. This was when overproduction and not enough suppliers left the mills with stock reserves. It also failed to provide jobs for the employees that had to be let go. The biggest change for Paisley was when World War I and World War II made the town suffer the most. World War I started in 1914 and ended in 1918. The town tried to rebuild itself after the First World War, and it was then faced with World War II, which started in 1938 and ended in 1945. Renfrewshire was a target for German bombers, with air raids killing people on near 100 several incidents. The biggest loss was a parachute mine which killed 92 people and was labelled the worst disaster in Paisley's history. Weavers in Paisley lost their livelihood and ended up leaving for Australia and Canada. The town regenerated itself by modernising the town centre and building new housing estates around the area. It began its campaign to be named the UK City of Culture in 2021 and 2015. Paisley was one of 5 candidates shortlisted in 2017, however lost its place to Coventry. Paisley has done remarkably well with the housing estates, playing a key role in providing accommodation for those throughout the years. The town centre was overpopulated and cramped, with poor housing making living conditions unbearable. In those days, there was only one toilet for every flat. People lived without gas, electricity, and were living in near enough barbaric conditions. The housing gave people new and better opportunities after the war. We're going to be looking at each of the main estates inside Paisley, looking at when they were formed, what they look like, and describing the general area inside the housing schemes. The order of the housing estates that we'll be looking at is Foxbar, Glenburn, Hunter Hill, Gallow Hill, Fergusley, while including Seed Hill, which is considered an area instead of a housing estate. The first estate we'll be looking at is Foxbar. Foxbar is located southwest in Paisley, with it sharing borders with Elderslie, a nearby town, and Glenburn, which is another estate in Paisley. It was built in 1952 in order to provide housing for families who needed to escape Paisley's more crowded and cramped areas. This was during the aftermath of World War II. Its plan was to bring middle-class people into the estate, but as time went on, more houses and flats were being built. Right now there's a mix of all different classes living inside the estate. Foxbar is known as a quiet residential area. It has a lot of greenery surrounding the place. The Glenifer Braes, also known as the car park of the sky, overlooks Foxbar from afar. Housing inside Foxbar consists of modern houses, bungalows and flats. There is only one big modern timber flat, which is called Elephant Court. There are restrictions for living inside the flat. If you were to live there, you must be 38 years old or over, and if you're to bring children, they must be at least 14 years old or over. Foxbar used to have 5 tower-storey flats to provide housing to, but the other 4 had been demolished to create a modern refurbishment around the area. Elephant Court is the only one that remains, as it is still owned by the council, and it is used to create housing for quieter residents. The facilities in Foxbar include having 3 primary schools, 1 high school. It also includes having a library, some other buildings like convenience stores and takeaway shops. Overall, Foxbar is a well-kept area. The estate was a success in terms of housing people, as it had them move to a safe and healthy environment, away from an overcrowded part like the town centre. Next to Foxbar is Glenburn, which is located south of Paisley. Glenburn sits on the boundary line of Braes Road, which leads up to the Glenifer Braes, which again is also known as Car Park in the Sky. The housing scheme was built in the 1950s in order to provide housing for families dealing with the aftermath of World War II. The exact same as Foxbar. Glenburn is known for being a compact residential area with mixed tenure. This means that some areas of the estate are busier, while others are a lot more quieter. Glenburn shares its boundaries with Foxbar, the town centre, and Barrhead the town. It is also quite close to Hunter Hill, which is the smallest housing scheme in Paisley. The housing in Glenburn consists of houses, flats and bungalows, with there being 2 tower-storey flats called Nethercraig Court and Glenifer Court. They were both built in 1966 and were later refurbished in 1990. Glenburn was the first estate to be built in the 1950s, with the housing having terraced, tenement and semi-detached houses for families to live in. Many of the tenement flats have been demolished to modernise the area, however some of the original terraced and semi-detached buildings are still in the area. Back in the day it was adequate and cheap to buy a home in Glenburn. There are actually quite a considerable amount of facilities inside Glenburn, including 2 primary schools, a doctor's surgery, a couple of petrol stations, 2 care homes, many convenience stores, some hairdressers, some takeaway shops, a good bus service that runs from Glenburn to the town centre and finally stopping in Glasgow city centre. And the last important things that Glenburn have to include is a Morrison's and Aldi shopping centre, which can sometimes be busy around these areas. Overall, Glenburn succeeded in housing people, giving people to live a better life and their families post-war. Next we're moving on to Hunter Hill. Hunter Hill is located southeast of Paisley and is around a mile off from Barrhead. It is also close to the town centre and Glenburn. Hunter Hill was built because of the Housing Act in 1946. This was in the aftermath of World War II. There were statistics showing that 2/3 of people that lived in the west of Scotland were in cramped accommodation, while in England the figure was 7%. Hunter Hill is the smallest housing estate in Paisley, being a residential area. The best way to describe the scheme is that houses are all put into one big circle. Housing in Hunter Hill is mixed, with there being a mix of new builds to original prefabs. Prefab is a short named for prefabricated housing. These were used as an emergency housing after World War II. The prefabs are made from concrete panels, which are then reinforced with steel and then bolted together with a steel frame. You can see there are lots of these houses in this area. That is because the people that live in them really like them, because when asked to relocate to better housing, the people inside them decided they wanted to stay in a prefabricated housing and bought them off the council during Margaret Thatcher's plan to let tenants buy their homes. Hunter Hill has little to no amenities. There are 2 convenience stores in the area, both quite in poor stock and shut at around 6 PM. Hunter Hill also used to have 6-in-a-block tenement flats, but were demolished due to building companies wanted to make more modern houses and flats in the area. The estate is not the most exciting, however it was the key for starting to house people after World War II. The next and probably the most historic part of Paisley is Seed Hill. Seed Hill is located east of Paisley, with it bordering Paisley's town centre, Hawkhead, Glasgow Road, and being relatively close to Hunter Hill. Seed Hill was considered an area inside Paisley instead of a housing estate, with it being built inside the Victorian era in 1886. This is where the thread industry in Paisley started to flourish. Before the town centre was built, Paisley's birthplace was in Seed Hill. The name Seed Hill means good fertile soil, and was to be believed where Paisley's early settlement would have been. Seed Hill used to be known as an industrial town due to the mills. However, presently the area is known to be a compact area due to the houses being so close and close together. Most of the housing inside Seed Hill is all Victorian tenement flat buildings. They are unique in a way as the housing is different from the housing estates. There are actually housing estates that were built inside the area in the 20th century, which are called Auchintorley, but I'm fairly sure the residents call the place Anchor just because some of the streets are named after that, and Williamsborough. These were built just outside Seed Hill, but are technically considered to be a part of the area. The facilities inside Seed Hill include a few off-licence shops, a hire drive, a newsagents, and a Seed Hill Community Centre ground, which shows the greenest part of the area. It includes a mix of astroturf playing fields and grass pitches. Overall, Seed Hill is considered an area inside Paisley, not an estate, but is a massive part of Paisley's history and identity. Now moving upwards to the northern parts of Paisley, we have Gallow Hill. Gallow Hill is located north-east of Paisley, sharing its boundaries with the M8 motorway, which is across the town Renfrew, and it's also really close to Paisley's town centre. Gallow Hill was built in the 1930s, and its plan was to provide housing for people after World War I. It's got its name from a mansion inside the estate called the Gallow Hill House, which was built in 1870. The building was being demolished as the houses in Gallow Hill were being built up, and the streets inside Gallow Hill were named after the people who lived inside the mansion. The best example is Dundonald Road, who had possession of the mansion in the late 1600s. Gallow Hill is a terribly busy and cramped area, due to it being in a built-up area with fast food and retail outlets being around the estate. Because of this, there is a lot of traffic just outside because of the M8 motorway as well. Housing in Gallow Hill hasn't changed since the 1970s, with the most common houses being terraced, cottage and 2-storey tenement flats. There is also 2 tower-storey flats which are called Gallow Hill Court and Glencairn Court. There used to be 3, with the other being called Arkelston Court, however it got demolished for the redevelopment inside the area. The houses are okay inside the scheme, although they are pretty close together. There are some areas which do need improvement on, but it's not the worst compared to other parts of Paisley. Gallagher is also known for having a high crime rate, with the most common acts being robberies, assaults, drug, and even gang related, and it's why Gallagher gets such a bad name. The facilities inside Gallagher are limited, with there being a community centre, a primary school, a few parades of shops, a daycare centre. However, the facilities outside Gallagher in a mile radius are actually okay. There is a big retail park and some fast food joints, which I guess do the trick. Overall, Gallagher is known to be quite a busy area just outside the estate due to the retail parks and the fast food joints, but the crime inside the area gives the estate a bad name. The last house in the scheme that I'll be covering is Fergusley, also known as Fergusley Park. Fergusley is located northwest of Paisley, and it is the oldest house in the estate in Paisley, being built in the 1920s, and was planned to be rebuilt in the 1960s. The housing scheme is cut off from the rest of Paisley with railway lines and disused railway embankments. To get into Fergusley, you would have to cross under these railway bridges or get a train into Paisley St James's station. It shares its boundaries with Elderslie, Shortroods and Linwood, while also being close to the M8 as well. Fergusley is very close to Glasgow actually, but not as close to Paisley. Fergusley is known for being a deprived urban area. This is because of many factors like poverty, unemployment, crime, and a low social understanding. Crime in Fergusley has died down, however the area still has its name attached for being a bad area. The most common acts are theft, robbery, and gang related. The housing compared to the rest of the states is poor and has a bad reputation for it. There have been some improvements to develop new modern housing in the area, however it only affects some of the estate, with the other parts being completely neglected. These types of housing is old tenement buildings, cottage flats and houses, with many of them falling apart or being boarded up. Inside Fergusley, there are no high-rise buildings within the scheme, meaning nothing is over 2 stories high in the area. Fergusley has been listed as one of the most deprived areas by the Scottish Government on multiple occasions. Media studies showed that in 1990, half of Fergusley was either unoccupied or demolished. At that time, a name was given to the estate, which was labelled Fee. This then led to the people who lived inside the estate being labelled as Fegs. The name is still used today for people that live inside Fergusley. These terms are quite outdated now since this was back in the 1990s. Moving on, the facilities inside Fergusley include Tannahill Community Centre, which includes a doctor's surgery, a library, a post office, a chemist, a mini market, community spaces, and some offices for the Housing Association inside Fergusley. There is also a police station, some takeaway shops and convenience stores, and it's also the home to St Mirren Football Club Stadium, which is in the middle of Fergusley. Fergusley had been and still is a neglected part of Paisley, with the early developments being in the late 1980s. The Tannahill Centre and demolished old houses and new houses being built did improve the area slightly, but there are still loads of houses in disrepair. Fergusley tried to rebuild, however did not really succeed in doing so, with it still being known as one of the roughest areas in Paisley. Even right now, the area is building new houses inside the estate, with there being at least 2 new housing developments trying to modernise the area. That was the last estate right there, and I hope you learned something about Paisley. Before I go, I want you to think about where you grew up. Every city, town, and village has a story behind it, even if it was built up last night. Remembering where you came from and how you're raised in that environment defines who you really are. In the modern day, everybody's overwhelmed by technology that sometimes they don't even get to understand what's out there in the world and what's actually around them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, I shall see you all later.